Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the New Energy Advancement Hub, which is a platform offering cutting edge research, innovative trainings, and business games to drive your successful energy transition. My name is Tatiana Mitrova. I am founder and director of the New Energy Advancement Hub. And today we have an event focused on low carbon fertilizers in developing countries. And our guest speaker is Adrian Duholt. Adrian, please join us. Adrian is non-resident scholar at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy and Southern Methodist University's Texas Mexico Center. Adrian, welcome to the New Energy Advancement Hub.
Hi, Tatiana. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone.
It's great pleasure for me. We've been working together with Adrian at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia's University School of International and Public Affairs. And I know that Adrian's professional and research interests, they are on the crossroad between political economy and development issues concerning the energy sector in Mexico, the US, and Latin America, and specifically his research projects. They are focused on natural gas, petrochemicals, and he publishes a lot of articles and reports on such topics as ammonia, fertilizer value chain, the energy sector liberalization in Mexico, social conflict in energy infrastructure projects, national oil companies, lots of interesting things. But more recently, Adrian has turned his attention to the energy food security nexus, which is extremely interesting, and I think it's often overlooked by the researchers. So this is something we want to talk about today, quite a specific but still extremely important topic for many, many countries in the world. And we will discuss the development of low carbon fertilizers and how this represents a valuable opportunity for developing countries. So, Adrian, without further ado, I will give floor to you to tell us, first of all, what is low carbon fertilizers? Why are they so important? And actually, what opportunities are they providing to the developing countries?
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Tatiana. And before I start, I also want to say thank you to everyone involved at the New Energy Advancement Hub for making this possible. And well, yeah, as you said, well, I've been looking at petrochemicals since I actually did my PhD. That was the main topic of my PhD dissertation: the relationship between Pemex as a supplier, Pemex in Mexico, the national oil company, as a supplier of petrochemicals, and then the private sector as buyers of these basic inputs. And since then, well, I've been looking at different topics, and now that and this topic, food security, is becoming more important, I think. And I want to kind of link I want to explore the nexus between energy, I mean, natural gas, green hydrogen, green ammonia, and food security. So the connection is basically low carbon fertilizers. So and I mean, you can read in my title, low carbon fertilizers in developing countries. I basically refer to those that come from clean ammonia and clean hydrogen. And well, I'm gonna start sharing my presentation.
Okay, go ahead.
So we can get started. So let's see if I do it well.
Yeah, it works.
Can you
Thank
see
you.
it?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think this is a topic that has attracted my attention recently. And today, what I'm going to talk about is basically, I mean, there is a lot of empirical evidence suggesting that in the developing world, production of fertilizers needs to increase. And as you said, Tatiana, I think it is a very valuable opportunity for developing countries to look at and to explore the option of green ammonia. I think that's an avenue that is going to gain momentum in some countries, not in every country in the developing world, because you need to have like certain conditions like policy, the proper set of incentives, and so on. And so I think it's going to gain momentum. Not I anticipate this to be like a more important topic in the next decade, for example. So ammonia and nitrogen fertilizers, especially urea, are essential for food production and therefore food security. So with this presentation, I want to actually provide some facts to build a case for green ammonia in developing countries. So recent, and one of them, one of these kind of context is the recent geopolitical events, that have demonstrated that farmers, especially in vulnerable countries, are exposed to international volatility concerning price and supply of nutrients, which down the road could have a negative impact on local crop productivity, food prices, and food security. For example, over the past 3 or 4 years, we have faced different geopolitical events like the outbreak of the pandemic. And so in Europe, amid looser COVID-related restrictions and a tight supply from Russia, gas prices, for example, reached an all-time high in Europe. So this context led to several ammonia nitrogen fertilizer plants across Europe to actually cease production, reduce production momentarily. So that actually aggravated supply concerns of fertilizers. And also in 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, many of you are familiar with the consequences in terms of natural gas prices. And with this being the main feedstock for the production of ammonia fertilizers, also there was there were consequences, along the chain. And also, and this industry is not only about geopolitical events. Climate change is also a huge factor. So, for example, in 2021, the winter storm that hit Texas and the hurricane in Louisiana in August of that year, are considered factors that help drive up prices of natural gas and ammonia and urea in North America. So on the part of geopolitical events, these are examples of what can happen in the future as well. But then also you have a very important driver of that affects this industry. For example, population growth. So population is set to increase from here to 2050 and to 20 by the end of the century, like significantly. And this situation, also has huge consequences for people facing food security or food insecurity. So as of 2023, around 345 million people worldwide continue to cope with high levels of food insecurity, more than double the number of 2020, and mostly driven by the recent geopolitical events I just described. So, as I was saying, one of the consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine was the rise of natural gas prices. So, on the left-hand side, you can see basically the consequences of this geopolitical situation. Soaring gas prices hit Europe, fertilizers and chemicals. And probably you don't appreciate the information on the map clearly, but basically it is a list of plants all over Europe that were, decreased production or cease operations altogether, during the 2022. And on the right-hand side, what you see is a map affected not only by geopolitical situations, but also by climate change events. For example, you can see that in the global south, you find the more vulnerable regions in relation to the disruption of the value chain of fertilizers and so on. So I was saying that Also, another driver is the population growth. I mean, ammonia production, ammonia demand in the future is set to increase, mostly driven by population growth. So right now we are 8.2 billion. The population is 8.2 billion, but it's set to increase to 9.8 billion in 2050. So, but look at the numbers with respect to where these population increases are going to come from. 9 countries will be responsible for half of the world's population growth: India, Nigeria, Congo, Pakistan, Ethiopia, Tanzania, the US, Uganda, and Indonesia, in that order. So basically, it will come from the global south. So how is the world going to feed a growing population? Amid geopolitical events that could affect production of these important raw materials, but also amid climate change events. Well, that's a question that I will try to answer. So the world will need more ammonia, certainly, but we cannot afford the emissions that come with its production. So that's what the head of the Energy Technology Policy Division of the International Energy Agency states. And I tend to agree with that, because we will need more fertilizers, we will need more ammonia to actually feed a growing population, and in many cases, a richer society. So conventional, and the problem is that conventional ammonia production represents around 2% of overall energy consumption globally, and also 1.8% of global CO2 emissions and 1% of global greenhouse emissions. So going forward from now to 2050, the argument is that if we are going to produce and demand more ammonia and more fertilizers, it better be produced in a sustainable way, or in a low carbon way. So these are the numbers about demand. For example, right now, in 2020, around 156 million tons of ammonia were demanded just for the production of fertilizers. And by 2050, it will be 267. But that is only in relation to fertilizers. So when new markets are considered, like the use of clean ammonia as hydrogen carrier or transport fuel, in shipping or for power generation, while demand of ammonia is going to increase to 688 billion tons by 2050. So that's a lot of ammonia we are going to need in 2050, thanks to these new markets. So based on all these considerations, it looks like green ammonia is likely to gain momentum. And I think it's gaining momentum. But in the long run, to what extent will the world's production of nitrogen fertilizers rely on green ammonia? I think that remains to be seen, because in some developing countries, projects are moving forward, but they are based on natural gas. I think, for example, in Mexico, it was recently announced that the government wants to start the construction of an ammonia and urea plant, but it's going to be based on natural gas. So from here to 2030, I think we're going to see more projects moving forward, but based on natural gas. So probably in the 2030s, it's when green ammonia the market is going to take off. So for developing countries, the green ammonia or economy is a valuable opportunity, but it cannot be limited to just supply export markets. Recently, I have learned that, for example, the government of Egypt has signed some agreements with European companies to produce green ammonia, but that will be destined to export markets. So in Latin America and Africa, both continents face their own set of challenges. Well, countries should also pursue their own goals in terms of fertilizer production and their carbonization efforts, even industrialization. And I want to show you this chart, because as you know, prices of fertilizers have gone up. I mean, nitrogen fertilizers have gone up. So what I did was to actually find out what were the largest markets in terms of imports, and then in both years, in 2018 and 2020, there were only 4 countries importing nitrogen fertilizers at a value of at least $1 billion each year. In 2022, that number jumped to 17 countries. 17 countries in 2022 were importing at least $1 billion of nitrogen fertilizers. So what's going on in Latin America? Well, Latin America, it's an important producer of foodstuff, but I think a less known fact is that the region, especially Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, they rely heavily on imports of fertilizers. So as you can see here, on that in this chart how imports have increased between 2016 and 2022. I think it's worth mentioning here that in 2023, the value of imports decreased. But the goal of showing you this chart is to illustrate how geopolitical events, international volatility around prices and supply, well, have an impact in the value of imports in those countries that don't have like domestic capabilities to produce nitrogen fertilizers. So between 2016 and 2022, imports of nitrogen fertilizers in Latin America's 10 largest markets grew from 3.4 billion to 12.4 billion dollars. And out of these 10 markets, which are the largest based on 2022 numbers, while they had Russia as the main import partner. So basically, what we can conclude is that the region's agricultural sector is closer to Moscow than it is from Washington. So, and as you can see, Brazil is the largest import market in Latin America, and I think one of the top 2 in the world. So you can see how in this chart, the value of imports have behaved between 2018 and 2023. 2022 was an atypical year, but as you can see, over the past 3 years, 2021, 2022, and 2023, imports are considerably higher than the previous 3 years. So, and this is an interesting fact. The president of Brazil flew to Russia just days before the Russian invasion to discuss with Putin different topics, but which include the trade of fertilizers or the supply of fertilizers from Russia to Brazil. So the point is that Brazil's agricultural production is very important for the world's food security. So I'm going to actually try to speed up my presentation to have like a conversation with you guys. Well, I was saying also that, for example, Latin America and Africa, both regions need to well, there is an opportunity for them to actually develop local capabilities to produce nitrogen fertilizers, but the set of challenges are different. While use of fertilizers in Brazil, Argentina is like within the range of the world's average, that's not the case for Africa. And actually, on this chart, you can see that for how much, for example, in 2006, Brazil was applying like 39 kilos of nitrogen fertilizers per hectare. But that's not the case for Africa. Look, there are regions in Africa, well, in 2006, that were applying 3.4 kilos of altogether, not only nitrogen fertilizers, but also including the other two types of large groups of fertilizers, phosphorus and potassium. So in South America, use of nitrogen fertilizers grew from 36 kilos in 2006 to 70 kilos in 2020. And as you can see, in the case of Africa, well, African countries consume or apply just a fraction of that volume in South America, and obviously the rest of the world. And we can see it here in 2020, like 26 kilos per hectare. That was the amount of fertilizers that were applied per hectare in Africa. In South America, well, you can see that the number is much higher, and actually in the rest of the world. So in 2006, the Abuja Declaration, which is a thing, an initiative advanced by the African Development Bank, called for the use of fertilizers to increase to 50 kilos by 2020. But as you can see, the goal hasn't been reached. And also, well, the challenges in Africa are different. And look at the market. So in 2022 in Latin America, imports in the 10 largest market was like around 12 billion, and here in Africa is around 3 billion. So it tells you a lot about the use or availability of fertilizers in Africa, but also the capacity of many countries to purchase fertilizers. So and then more recently, I actually learned that Nigeria put into operation a new urea of a fertilizer plant. I think it was in 2021 or 2022. So I was kind of intrigued by, I mean, where is this production of fertilizers going to? And according to the UN Comtrade, I found that of the top 10 export markets for Nigeria's production of fertilizers, only one country made the list. I mean, only one African country made the list. So in 2022, most of the production of fertilizers from Nigeria ended up in countries like Brazil, the US, India, Argentina, and Mexico. So that actually makes me wonder if we're going to see similar cases with the fertilizer projects in being announced in Africa, for example. Well, that's the case of Egypt. You know, the agreement, the different agreements that the government of Egypt reach with European companies is for the production of clean ammonia, but for export markets to be sent to Europe. So, well, in 2022, only Benin was among the 10 top export markets of Nigeria. But in 2023, South Africa, Benin, and Ethiopia were among the countries' top 10 export markets. But they may be, among these 10 top markets, but the value of exports to these three countries only represented 8.5% of the total value of exports from Nigeria. So that's very kind of interesting to find out. And also, I did the same exercise with Egypt. Look, only Djibouti is the only African country among the top 10 export markets for the Egyptian production of nitrogen fertilizers. So what can we argue about this situation? That well, there are other developing countries, well, like in the case of Nigeria, where they have a higher capability to purchase production of fertilizers from Nigeria or from Egypt. So that tells you, well, that is a problem for Africa. And well, that's with respect to clean ammonia. I think the argument here is that clean ammonia is one avenue that some developing countries should and are exploring for exports, but also it should be for developing domestic capabilities. But there is another topic that I would like to incorporate in this discussion, and I would like to go deeper in the future into it. For example, while green ammonia could be an alternative for certain developing countries like Brazil, South Africa, Egypt, Chile, countries that are rich in natural resources like wind and solar power, both Africa and Latin America could also explore another avenue to potentially produce nitrogen fertilizers, which is the reduction of flaring. I was looking at the numbers between flaring and the production of natural gas in these regions, and what you can see here is that South and Central America and Africa are the regions of the world where large volumes of natural gas are being flared, in relation to their production. So in 2022, the world average was 3.6%. So 3.6% of the production is being flared. But in South America, that number is almost 9%. And in Africa, is almost 12%. That is only in 2022. But when you actually look at the information from 2010 to 2022, you will find out that flaring is a persistent problem in these regions. Flaring in Africa in 2010 was around 18.70% of production, and then, well, in South Africa, in South America, the numbers are lower, but way higher than the world's average. So my point is that instead of flaring this natural gas, you can actually make use of it and transform it into, well, it could be power generation, but also fertilizers is an option. So I want to conclude by saying this, that this, across the developing world, not only Africa and Latin America, but because another case, very interesting, important case to look at is India. India is one of the two top import markets of fertilizers. And, millions of people depend on, agricultural activities, and the government spends billions of dollars each year in subsidizing fertilizers. So not only Africa and Latin America, but, the developing world is vulnerable to global headwinds affecting the price and supply of nutrients. We have seen it over the past 3 years. So fostering green ammonia production and even actually flaring reduction could be pathways that these countries could explore and help create capabilities to produce nitrogen fertilizers, at home, and down the road, lessen global volatility around the supply chain, boost food security, and cut emissions. But here we need to actually emphasize that it seems to me that it's going to gain momentum in certain countries. It's not going to be all over the developing world. And some conditions need to be met. For example, policies. So the local governments need to design and instrument policies for this to happen. Also, access to financial resources. That will be a very important obstacle to overcome, because there is empirical evidence suggesting that, well, the developing world needs more fertilizers and needs to produce more fertilizers. So going forward, if it is these fertilizers are produced in a low carbon manner, I think that's the way forward. So Tatiana, and with that, I think I conclude my presentation. And I don't know if we can take questions from the public, or I don't know. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, definitely I have a lot of questions. That's for
Okay.
sure. Thank Thank you so much for the presentation. I've learned a lot. To be absolutely clear, I have to confess, I don't know much about nitrogen fertilizers, so it was like eye-opening exercise for me. And indeed, it looks like they are absolutely critically important for the developing world, at least, because like OECD countries, they are already mature markets. They can afford to import all these nitrogen fertilizers. So we do not care that much about their food security. Yeah, but for the rest of the world, where hunger is still a real problem, fertilizers are really essential, and especially in Africa, as you have shown, it is really a big problem. But then I have, as I said in my confession, I don't know much, so I will ask stupid questions. And meanwhile, I will suggest to our audience to write down in LinkedIn and in YouTube comments your clever questions. But I will start with stupid. So, Adrian, what is green or sustainable fertilizers? How do you produce them? What is needed for them? How does it work?
Well, actually, it's more, that's a technical discussion because, for example, you need to increase power generation from renewables, solar, wind, hydro. So those countries that are rich in these resources, well, basically they have an advantage, Like, I don't know, for example, in some Latin American countries, their energy mix relies heavily, the structure of it relies heavily on clean energy. Like Colombia, Peru, Brazil, like 50, 60, 70% of their energy needs come from, clean sources. So basically, there are like, and also in Africa, but the potential is there. But they need to actually, when you build when you actually want to bet, if you want to bet on clean ammonia, basically, well, you need to produce green hydrogen for for that. But also, well, uh, you need renewables to power the whole process. And
Mhm.
basically, since you are using clean ammonia to produce fertilizers, well, that's why you call them like low carbon fertilizers. Yeah.
Is it like so just technically, if we are speaking about green ammonia, for example, should it be like 100% renewable, or are you also looking at some mixtures where it
Well,
is
it could be a
partially
mixture.
produced based on natural gas and partially based on green energy?
Well, yeah, well, around 70-80% of today's ammonia production comes from natural gas. The rest comes from coal, for example. But if you capture CO2, that you reduce emissions in the process. So you call it blue ammonia, and so on,
Mhm.
and
So
so
we
on.
are
So that's
talking
why,
basically not only about green hydrogen, but also blue hydrogen is an option, and all the mixes in between.
yeah, yeah. And what I see is that, for example, just by reducing flaring and capturing that natural gas and use it for power generation or for fertilizers, you are in a way reducing emissions.
Mhm.
You know.
That was my other question because, yeah, gas flaring, especially in such countries as Nigeria, for example, it's really a very big issue, and utilization of this flared gas into ammonia production, for example, or any other nitrogen fertilizers processes, that would result in the reduction of emissions. So it's really a good thing which contributes to the sustainability. So in your taxonomy, it's also part of these sustainable fertilizers family, right?
Well, yeah. The idea of actually making this presentation is because I've been working on this topic, but now when I write the paper, so I need to kind of figure out which what's going to be the angle. Obviously, I want to show the empirical evidence suggesting that these countries need to invest in in, in clean ammonia and fertilizers, but in cases like Nigeria, well, flaring is also a problem that needs to be addressed. And well, not only Nigeria, I mean, countries like Mexico, flaring has been a problem recently, and the country at the same time, well, in the case of Mexico, is at the same time very reliant on imports of natural gas. So you are importing a lot of natural gas, but at the same time, the little production you have, you are like flaring it. And also fertilizers. I mean, I think there is only one urea plant in the country operating at the moment, and it doesn't. It's not enough to meet domestic demand. So instead of flaring that natural gas, well, why don't you actually use it to produce fertilizers? I mean, you need investment. And one big problem right now in Mexico is that the national oil company, that, as you may know, participates in the whole hydrocarbon value chain. Well, it's in a very difficult financial situation. So you need to be, I mean, the government needs to be willing to welcome private investment, and that is, I think, it may happen in the years to come. But that's also another angle to study the link between energy and food security. Flaring.
Yeah, I see. So we are starting to receive questions from the audience. Avidipta is asking, as ammonia, green or otherwise, plays a more significant role in the energy sector, do you expect the price of fertilizers to go up? Yeah, this competition between energy and food.
Yeah. That's a very interesting question, because now you're not going to have only ammonia. Right now, I think like 70% of ammonia production ends up in the fertilizer sector. But now you are going to have other markets developing, like shipping, probably power generation, hydrogen. So it remains to be seen if that is going to put pressure on fertilizer prices. And also, that's one aspect of the conversation. The other is, well, the unexpected geopolitical events that may disrupt supply chains. This trade war between the US and China, is it going to continue, going forward? So, and also climate change.
Yeah, that was also very surprising for me, but yeah, it makes sense that it's not only like disruptions in the fertilizer supplies due to geopolitics, but also the like conditions of agriculture changing so fast that we are not actually properly prepared to face those changes. In connection to that, another question from Nijua. If you have any specific view on North Africa and fertilizers production, nitrogen fertilizers production in North Africa specifically.
Well, interesting that they mentioned North Africa, because I wanted to do the same exercise with Morocco, because Morocco is also an important producer of nitrogen fertilizers in Africa. So I wanted to see where that production is is going. But the information, I mean, the database I use, I don't know. For example, in 2022, exports of nitrogen fertilizers from Morocco were around 12 billion. But in 2023, a bit more than 1 billion. So I don't know what happened, to be honest. But Morocco, uh, uh, for example, is among its export partners are in Africa. Many, for example, Mauritania, if I remember well. So actually, Morocco's production, well, in volume terms, actually, it's sending more nitrogen fertilizers to Africa than Nigeria, for example, or Egypt. So I think in the case of North Africa, well, Morocco is the natural market or the natural supplier for North Africa, and thanks to its potential in solar energy, and I think it's going to become a very important player in the clean ammonia, clean hydrogen economy in Africa.
Hmm. I was very impressed by the numbers that you've shown regarding nitrogen fertilizers imports in Latin America, which grew nearly 4 times during the past 5 years, if I'm not mistaken. So that's incredible market growth. And these markets in Latin America, these are like transitioning economies. So they have a higher level of life, level of personal revenues than the poorest countries in Africa, for example. So they could have afforded these imports. Yeah. Uh, my question is more focused on Africa and specifically on the poorest countries, which can produce these fertilizers, which can produce these blue or green or like common ammonia. But can they afford using it, or are they like doomed to send these fertilizers for exports for those who can afford it, who are more rich?
Well, I think that's a different game. In the case of the least advanced countries in Africa, the solutions are a bit different. You need international organizations to team up, with international development banks to actually address the need of fertilizers in those countries. Because as I said earlier, I think production of clean ammonia and fertilizers is not going to take off in throughout the developing world. It's going to happen in some countries, well,
Mhm.
several countries, but in less advanced countries, I don't see that happening. But then the question is, who is going to supply fertilizers to them? And also because they don't have the purchasing power to weather, the price fluctuations, like Latin America, for example, or Brazil. I
Yeah.
think that there needs to be a integral solution, comprehensive solution, where international development agencies, NGOs, international development banks team up to actually address that problem. And also look at the numbers. I mean, in the charts, and the use of fertilizers is very little.
Yeah.
I don't know, there are like several countries that apply less than 10 kilos per hectare. So how can you expect to increase crop productivity under those conditions?
Yeah. So those who need these fertilizers, most of all, they cannot afford it. And I agree with your point that purely market mechanisms can hardly deal with this issue. So it's actually the challenge, the task for the international community, for the development agencies to deal with this problem. It will not resolve itself. But with the other part where we have market ready to pay, yeah, what is the business model? Yeah, if you are looking at the market of Brazil, for example, which is growing, which is maturing, which has this purchasing power, and let's say African countries or Mexico deciding to produce green ammonia in order to export it to the US or to Brazil or wherever. So, how do you think it would work in terms of attracting investments? Who is going to invest in this green ammonia production? And how do you think this market can evolve? Is there going to be a price premium for green ammonia, or like uh, how can they get investment return? Because it's obviously currently more expensive than producing like traditional conventional ammonia.
I think one important driver of demand is going to be Europe. On the one hand, Europe is kind of reducing its reliance on imports of natural gas from Russia, but on the other,
Mhm.
it's increasing its imports of fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers. So they are like actually approaching those countries that are rich in, these resources, wind power, solar power. I mean, to actually reach agreements, like in the case of Egypt. So it seems to me that many or most of the announced clean ammonia projects are to serve export markets. So that's basically the business model I distinguish right now. I am yet to see a project stating that, well, we are going to produce clean ammonia, but to transform it into fertilizers here in the country. There may be actually, because I mean, I can, but and that's more likely to happen in, well, countries like Brazil. Their need for fertilizers is so huge that eventually they will need to produce their own fertilizers, at least some of it. Also India, for example. And the question is it going to be clean or is it going to be from natural gas? I was saying earlier that in the case of Mexico, the projects that have recently been announced are based on natural gas. So the country is yet to develop a comprehensive strategy to explore the potential of clean ammonia. Brazil is I think more ahead. India, but I think that that's I think the business model I see right now.
Mm-hmm. Actually, we have question from Jesse. How do you expect the price of fertilizers to change as the use of green ammonia, low carbon fertilizers increases? Actually, it's repeating Avinipla's question. Uh, will these fertilizers be financially accessible to smallholder farmers?
Well, when you compare the cost of production, uh, ammonia based on natural gas and ammonia based on clean sources, well, obviously there is a huge at the moment a big difference. The gap is going to close in the 2030s, in the 2040s. So from now until then, I think clean ammonia and low carbon fertilizers, the market will have to pay a premium.
Mm-hmm.
And some markets are willing to do so because there is demand.
But looking, let's say, at Africa and Latin America, so how viable is the development of green hydrogen and green ammonia and green fertilizers in these regions, let's say, by 2030, 2040? So, do you see any projects not already announced, but at least evolving? Do you see any leader countries where you've mentioned Brazil? Yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, I assume
Chile.
you expect Brazil to build something like that, maybe something else?
Well, yeah, Chile as well. It's advanced in that sense. Also, well, Egypt,
And you
South Africa.
mentioned India also, yeah. Mm.
Yeah, South Africa, for example. But the question is, in I mean, the case of Egypt and South Africa, is their production going to be for African markets or for European or Latin American or Asian markets? Because that's what we are seeing right now with the production of fertilizers from Nigeria and Egypt. So is it I mean, this kind of practice is going to be replicated with the clean ammonia economy? Because it seems to me that geographical proximity, I mean, the fact that your neighbor needs fertilizers, that's not enough to actually export your production to that country because the purchasing power.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about these countries. So, um, let's imagine a country in Central Africa, which has huge water resources, for example, and solar resources. So they can build hydropower plants. They can build solar plants potentially. Yeah, if they attract investors. They can produce green electricity. They could potentially find investors to build electrolyzers and produce green hydrogen. Yeah, and then out of
Uh,
that produce green fertilizers. But given the rate of electricity penetration, yeah, and giving this huge hunger for any electricity basically available, yeah. So this choice, yeah, for the countries how to use renewables, whether to use them directly for electricity generation and electrification of everything which is not electrified, or to go through this expensive and complex supply chain to produce green fertilizers. So, what should be the drivers to really force them to make their choice in favor of green fertilizers? What do you think?
I think the policies that the country is willing to implement. But that's a very interesting question because I wonder if these countries have the the capabilities to attract this kind of investment. You know, I think that's a very genuine doubt because we have seen it before, and also the point you make about electricity penetration is very low. So are you going to use the electricity you are producing to for clean ammonia or for clean hydrogen instead of using it for the population? So or both, you know. But I think it's going to be challenging for some countries. It's going to be more challenging than for others to uh, ride this wave of the new clean energy economy.
But if we are speaking about the leading countries, you've named several which are promising, looking promising. So for them, are we thinking about external foreign investors like European companies or US companies coming with their technology packages and building the whole production chain? Or should it be more on the national oil company side or national utility side, more like government led because of food security considerations or whatever? So, how do you think it will work in India, for example, or in Brazil?
I think it's going to be a combination of sources. It's not going to be only private investors or international private investors, but also domestic private investors. And in the case of Brazil, the national oil company is said to play a big role. In Mexico, it could play a big role as well, but the company is facing financial, it's under a lot of financial stress. Let's put it that way. But that's one part of the conversation. The other conversation we should have, in at least in Latin America, is what's going on in the US with respect to all these pieces of legislation to accelerate the energy transition. That the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. Because, for example, I think, let's take Mexico as an example. Mexico exports crude oil mostly. When you look at the structure of the energy trade of the country, it exports crude oil mostly, but it imports everything, high value products, from diesel, petrochemicals, natural gas, motor fuels. I mean, you name it. If a country like Mexico doesn't set up the appropriate policy framework to develop other low carbon energy solutions like clean ammonia. So what's going to, how's the trade, going to look like in the future? Is Mexico going to end up importing also green fuels, not only fossil fuels? So what's going to happen with the rest of Latin America as well? Because a very important market for the refining industry in the US is basically Latin America, Brazil, Chile, Mexico. Are these countries going to end up importing green fuels from the US, or are they going to develop their own capabilities? I think that remains to be seen. But Mexico probably will end up importing green fuels in the future. So probably the same may happen in some African countries or Asia.
Aditya is asking, and I think it is related to what you are saying. So, do we expect consolidation of the supply market, green electricity to fertilizer, in terms of geography and countries? Do we see any like centers of power evolving on this market?
Well, I think so. Like there are going to be some winners, and there are going to be some countries won't have the capacity to develop these industries. The smaller countries, countries that are facing more pressing social problems. But countries like Brazil,
And
India, Egypt, South Africa, I think they are better positioned to take advantage of the demand or the needs for producing more fertilizers.
And if you imagine yourself as an advisor of one of these countries which have an opportunity to become leaders of this process, policy advisor, yeah, what would be your like top three suggestions? What are the deal breakers here? What is absolutely the must for them to do in order to have these projects happening?
Okay, you have countries with huge demands like Brazil, India, Mexico, Argentina. I don't know. But how can you actually make sure that production of all those commodities happen locally. Financing, I think you need to find financing solutions for these companies, for these projects, not only locally, but also abroad. Also policies, domestic policies with respect to rule of law, because in some countries that is a very some countries have a more challenging context than others in terms of rule of law. So make sure you don't change the rules of the game halfway through. I think
So
that,
it's like
and also
investor guarantees and like stable and predictable taxation, these sort of things. Yeah, like property
yeah,
rights. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah, because we have seen here in
Uh,
Mexico,
I, I,
yeah.
so these are two. Yeah. Third one.
Okay, I would say infrastructure. You will need, well, not
And what
only
kind of
like
infrastructure is needed here?
transmission lines, for example. So transmission is important. I mean, you need obviously a solar power plant or a hydro power plant, but you need also transmission infrastructure. So that, I think, an important avenue to explore or to invest in.
So it's money, financing, investment climate, and state support and some guarantees of infrastructure development. Yeah.
Yeah, infrastructure development.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I see another comment from Nijua, remember asking about North Africa, writes that the same question on Algeria, I do not know where production is going. Yeah, so it seems that this market of fertilizers is not that transparent, and that clarity and transparency would be also something important on the global scale in order to make it evolving in the way we need it to evolve, right?
Yeah. Well, as for that question, I don't know where the production of Algeria goes to, but I can find out if actually you share my email with Kechai. I can actually find out that information for her.
Mm-hmm. But generally, I think, well, we are approaching to the end of our conversation, which was extremely interesting and enlightening for me. So I was never thinking in this dimension about um, dependency and even competition between food and energy. And at the same time, obviously, they are uh, important for each other and equally important for people, for the consumers, for the population, especially in the developing countries. Uh, it looks like an extremely fast growing market. So the numbers are incredible in terms of volumes growth, and the prices or the revenues are also looking extremely attractive for the investors. So there should be now I understand your point why you expect an explosion in this market in the next couple of decades. So yeah, uh, being on the investor side, I would be very interested in exploring more about this market, which definitely needs some additional transparency and definitely needs a lot of efforts on the government side, on the side of financial institutions, private investors, and so on. But I think you've chosen a fantastic topic for research, which will occupy you busy for many decades
Yeah.
ahead.
Well, decades. Well, yeah. Yeah. But the thing is that it seems to me when you look at the evidence, in terms of fertilizers and these new markets like shipping and well, for ammonia, I think it's going to become a thing in the 2030s. Probably not right now. Many people is kind of thinking, exploring, looking at what to do to actually take advantage of these uh, prospective demand increases. But in the 2030s, I think it's going to become a very important commodity in the energy mix of the world.
So, my last question. Uh, if you were a magician and you could make our listeners to remember just one message from all this conversation, what would you like them to keep in their mind?
Well, that food security is a very complex problem. It's not only related to the supply of fertilizers. It's a very social. It's a socially oriented, economic oriented concept. So the conversation today is just one part of the picture, but it's going to become a very important part of the conversation.
That's for sure. Adrian, thank you so much. That was extremely interesting. Yeah, and I would also try to inspire our audience. Well, first of all, to follow our social media for the next events, to subscribe, to keep in touch with Adrian. You can find his LinkedIn profile in all our announcements. If you have any additional questions, don't hesitate to contact us and Adrian directly. And yeah, let's keep in touch. Let's stay together and in order to explore other dimensions of the new energy advancement. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Tatiana. See ya.